I got home late in the afternoon. I dropped my bag on the chair, took off my shoes, and stood still for a few seconds, just looking at the living room in silence. The house felt bigger without him, not empty, bigger. It was there, in that ordinary silence, that I felt a longing that didn't shout, but weighed heavy. I went to the kitchen without much hunger. I opened the fridge, then closed it again. I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter, thinking about how, before, he would always appear behind me, hugging my waist, while I pretended to complain. Now, only the sound of the faucet. I sat on the couch, with the lights still off. The TV remote was in the same place. Nothing had changed, and at the same time, everything had. I put on something. Anything, more to fill the space than to actually watch. My mind was far away. I picked up my phone. Out of habit, no new messages, no notifications from him. I knew he wouldn't come. Even so, looking at the screen was part of the ritual. It was strange to realize how someone's absence can become routine. It was there, sitting on that sofa, that I began to remember when everything still seemed simple, when he came home tired, and yet he made a point of staying. In that moment, I didn't know yet, but that memory was the beginning of the end. I got up from the sofa and went to the bedroom. I changed my clothes slowly, as if time had slowed down when I folded the shirt. I smelled him still there. It wasn't strong. It was almost nothing, but it was enough to make me stop with the clothes in my hands and take a deep breath. I lay on the bed, wide awake, the pillow next to me stayed neatly arranged, just the way I always left it. I looked at the ceiling and found myself remembering how he used to come home tired, lie down beside me, and tell me simple things from his day, as if only there he could truly rest. I closed my eyes. For a few seconds, the silence was broken only by the distant sound of cars on the street. It was in that silence that I thought about how many times I felt that he was there, but wasn't really, present in body, absent in everything else. I remembered the messages I used to send, always long, always explaining how I felt, and his replies, short, polite, empty. At the time, I told myself that he was just tired, that it was a phase, that it would pass. But that night, lying in bed, for the first time, I allowed myself to think that maybe it wasn't just tiredness. Maybe it was disinterest. Maybe it was distance. Maybe it was the beginning of a goodbye that I didn't want to see. The next day, I woke up before the alarm. I stayed for a few minutes, staring at the room, trying to remember when it was that I started waking up tired. Even after sleeping the whole night, I got up, went to the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was there, but it felt like something was missing, something I still couldn't name. I made a simple coffee. The smell spread through the kitchen, and for a moment, I thought about sending a message, saying good morning, like I always did. I held my phone in my hand, typed, deleted, again. In the end, I left the phone on the table and drank my coffee in silence. I left the house to take care of simple things. The world went on as usual. People were talking, laughing, walking quickly. I watched everything, as if I were a little out of place. It was strange to realize how life continues, even when something inside us seems to have stopped. On the way back, I passed by a place we used to go together. Nothing forced me to remember him. The memory came on its own. It came with the feeling that I was always waiting for him to become who he was at the beginning, and that exhausted me. That day, for the first time, I asked myself how long I had been holding an entire relationship by myself, not out loud, only inside me. And that question, so simple, started to change everything I felt. That week, I began to notice things I had ignored before. I realized how I always adjusted my schedule to fit into his, how I waited for messages that arrived when they didn't matter as much anymore, and how I called it patience. What, deep down, was giving up on myself. I remembered the conversations that never happened, the topics I swallowed, so I wouldn't create a bad mood. I told myself I understood that relationships were like that, but understanding too much started to make me feel small, almost invisible, inside my own life. One random night, I got home exhausted, dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the bed, and stayed there, still, staring at nothing. That's when I realized I wasn't tired from the day. I was tired of waiting for someone who wouldn't show up whole. I picked up my phone and reread old conversations, the ones from the beginning, the ones where he seemed interested, present, curious about me. I compared them to the latest ones. The difference hurt more than any argument we never had. At that moment, something inside me started to change. It wasn't courage. Not yet. It was exhaustion. A deep exhaustion that made me realize love shouldn't require so much effort just to exist. In the following days, I started acting differently, not by choice, but by sheer lack of strength. I stopped starting conversations. I stopped explaining my feelings. It wasn't pride. It was exhaustion. And it was strange to notice how everything felt even more distant when I stopped holding alone what we used to call a relationship. He noticed, of course. He asked if everything was okay. The question came simple, quick, like someone fulfilling an obligation. I answered yes, the same way he always answered. While typing, I realized something painful. I was speaking the language he taught me to accept. One night, I prepared something to eat and sat at the table alone. I watched the house in silence and noticed how many times I had imagined him there, occupying a space that was no longer his. It was there that I felt a calm sadness. Narration, Nora's, just a gentle weight on my chest. I remembered when I laughed easily, when I felt chosen, when I didn't need to ask for attention or translate my emotions. I realized that, little by little, I had stopped being myself, trying to be enough for someone who never asked to stay. That night, before going to sleep, I thought about how everything had changed. without a big fight, without a major decision, just from the accumulation of absences. And, for the first time, I asked myself if staying was costing me more than leaving. The next day, I woke up with the feeling that something had shifted inside me. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I made coffee, made the bed, and did everything automatically, as if my body knew what my mind was still trying to accept. During the day, I noticed that I no longer thought of him. At every pause, the thought still came, but it no longer dominated everything. It was like a distant song, playing softly in the background, while other things started to take up space. In the afternoon, I sat by the window and watched the movement of the street, people coming and going, lives following their paths. I thought about how many times I had paused my own, waiting for him to decide if he would stay or not. This realization hurt, but it also set me free. I picked up my phone a few times, not to talk to him, but out of habit. I realized there was no urgency anymore, no need to prove anything, no desire to convince. When love becomes constant effort, something essential is already lost. That night, lying in bed, I understood that I didn't need a big conversation. I needed courage to accept what had already been clear for a long time, and this acceptance started to change everything. In the days that followed, everything looked the same on the outside. The same schedules, the same streets, the same routines. But I was no longer the same. There was something calmer in me, as if I had stopped fighting a truth that had always been there. He sent a message. Nothing different, nothing urgent. I read it, replied politely, and put the phone aside. New expectations. I noticed, almost surprised, that I was no longer hoping. That conversation would save me, and that said more than any silence before. I cleaned the house carefully, folded clothes, organized drawers, threw away old papers. Each small gesture gave me a strange feeling of closure, as if, without realizing it, I was preparing myself to close a door I had kept open for far too long. While washing the dishes, I realized something simple and deeply sad. I no longer felt anger, nor resentment, nor the urge to argue. When love turns into nothing but memory, pain changes its shape. It becomes quiet and finale. That night, before going to sleep, I thought about everything I tried, and for the first time, I didn't blame myself for not being able to make it work alone. Maybe loving also means knowing when to stop insisting. The next day, I woke up lighter, not lighty. I opened the bedroom window and let the air come in. The sky looked ordinary, like any other day. It was strange to realize that the world doesn't change when we change on the inside. It simply goes on. And somehow, that was comforting. I prepared coffee slowly, sat at the table without rushing, without a phone in my hand. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for any message. Not because I had blocked him, but because I had stopped, placing my peace in the hands of someone who didn't know how to take care of it. Throughout the day, I thought about him a few times, but the memories came like old photographs. They existed, but they didn't hurt the same way anymore. I understood that missing someone didn't mean wanting them back. Sometimes it's just respect for the story that was lived. Also realized that I didn't need final explaining. Everything I needed to know was in the repeated actions, in the long silences, in the constant absences. When someone wants to stay, they don't leave doubts. And that clarity, even if it came late, brought me peace. That night, lying in bed, I understood that an ending doesn't need to be announced. It simply happens when we decide to stop abandoning ourselves. And deep down, I already what my final step would be. On the day I decided to leave, there was no argument. There was no announcement. I simply woke up and knew. I packed my things carefully, folded clothes, put away memories, without hashi and without anger. When we truly understand, noise is no longer necessary. I walked through the house one last time, touched the furniture, looked at the spaces where I waited for too long. I didn't feel hatred. I felt gratitude for finally being able to see. Some loves don't end because they run out. They end because they teach. The line between loving and losing yourself. Before leaving, I looked at my phone. No messages. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. I realized I didn't need him to understand. I needed to respect myself. Not every closure comes from the other person. Some we create on our own. I left the house and took a deep breath. The world looked the same, but I wasn't. I walked slowly, feeling the ground, feeling my body present. For the first time in a long while, love shouldn't cost your own peace. And it took me time, but I learned. Today, when I think of him, I don't feel longing. I feel respect for the woman I was when I still didn't know how to protect myself. I wasn't left. I chose to stop, abandoning myself. And that was the quietest and most powerful way to begin again.